Hi, I'm James Williams and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to learn how to use Power Automate to post a praise type post to Viva Engage, including an image. So we're going to be building on the themes we've seen on this channel already, in which we auto-scored a Microsoft Forms quiz and in which we built a custom Word template. And we're going to build those together so that when someone scores highly on the quiz, a certificate will get generated from the Word template. But then I'm going to save that certificate Word document as a JPEG file, so an image, and I'm going to try and automatically post into a Viva Engage post of the praise type, including that image, to say congratulations to the person that passed the quiz. So if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around and watch this video. So the first thing you might think of doing in order to try and achieve this is looking at the existing Viva Engage connector in Power Automate. So we can see here on the Viva Engage connector that the only option we've got to post the message into a Viva Engage community is this post message v2 action. So if I use that and have a look at what options we've got a group ID, so we can select the group, and we've got the text parameter, so we can choose what to say. But there's nowhere here, even if we show all the additional options, the advanced parameters here, we can see there's no way of actually telling this post that we want it to be a praise type post, and there's nowhere for us to include an image. So in order to get around those limitations of the built-in Viva Engage connector, we're going to use the Yammer API. So here we are at the documentation for the Yammer REST API, and we can use this to interact programmatically with Viva Engage, and we can use Power Automate to do that. So we can see here that it supports Azure Active Directory tokens, which are now called Entra ID tokens. So we can authenticate with this API using that, and then we'll be able to call one of these endpoints in order to hopefully achieve what we want to and post that praise type post. So if I go to this post messages as a starting point, you can see here that there's a few things that might help us. So the network ID, the group ID where we want to post the praise to, things like the text, the message body. But scrolling down a bit more, you can see that also we've got an option to specify the message type. So hopefully that will work for praise. And we've got the option to attach a file to a post, as long as we've already uploaded that file via the upload small file API. So we're going to have a look at that next. It's at the bottom of the list here, upload small file. And we can see that we can upload a particular file to this API. So we're going to use that to upload the image of the certificate for the user. And then we can use the post messages endpoint to post the message. And there were a few other things we needed for that. So we'll need to know the ID of the group. So that's a Yammer ID for the group that we want to post into, the Viva Engage community, that means. So in order to do that, we will try and first of all get the current user. So this is the user we're going to be running the flow as, and that'll be the user, therefore the praise post will come from. So running this current user endpoint here, that will allow us to get the ID for the current user. And then from that current user ID, we can use this get groups endpoint to, using that ID, get the groups associated with that user. So that will hopefully turn up the group we want to post into in terms of its Yammer ID. And then lastly, we need to know the details of the user we're going to praise. So we're going to use this get user by email endpoint here, because we'll have the user's email from their submission of the Microsoft form. So between those endpoints, we should be able to do everything we want to via the Yammer API. So as we saw here on the front page of the Yammer API documentation, that the Yammer REST API supports Azure Active Directory, or Entra ID as it's now called, tokens. So in Power Automate, there's a few ways we can go about that. And one of the usual ways is that we might try to use the HTTP with Microsoft Entra ID pre-authorized connector and the invoke an HTTP request. We're not going to be able to use that in this case, and I'll show you why. So for the most part, we should be able to use this. So if I take an example API endpoint from here. So in order to connect to this, we'll need to use the base URL of the API, and we'll need to create a connection to that base URL for the connector here, and that will pass on that Entra ID token. If I put in yammer.com here and sign in, we can start to use that, and that will allow us to authenticate to those endpoints. However, one of the API endpoints we have to use in order to achieve the image upload for the praise post is this one, and you can see it has a slightly different base URL, and it starts files ng rather than www. So if I copy that and try and do the same thing to authenticate for the Entra ID connector and sign in, again I'll click to sign in, but this time we get an error. So it says that resource principal named filesng.yammer.com was not found in the tenant. So because of that, we're not going to be able to use this connector at all, and for that reason we're going to use a custom connector in order to achieve the interaction with the Yammer API. In order to create our custom connector, we're going to go to make.powerautomate.com, and then we're going to go to more and discover all down here, and then if we scroll down in this section, we can see that there's a page for custom connectors. I'm actually going to pin this so I can find it more easily later from the left-hand rail, but if we go to this page, there's no custom connectors here at the moment, but I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to create it from blank so we can see the whole process, and I'm going to call it Viva Engage. So the first page is very general information about the connector, so we can give it a nice icon. So if I use the Viva Engage logo here, and then the rest of the details here that we need, we can get from the documentation. So here's that current user endpoint. So we can see the scheme's HTTPS, and then the base URL is going to be www.yammer.com. So we can paste that in the host box after the scheme's been selected. And then for this base URL, we can see that all the Yammer API endpoints start with this /API/v1. So again, we can copy that out if I can get the right part and paste that over as the base URL. And if I put that slash on the end, that will appear at the front of all the individual endpoints we need. So we can continue now to choose the security for the connector. So as we previously mentioned, we're going to be authenticating via an Entra ID token, which is OAuth2. So we select that here. We can then choose the identity provider. Rather than generic, we're going to choose Azure Active Directory. And now we're going to need some details that we don't have, so we're going to have to go and create these: a client ID, a client secret, authorization URL, tenant ID, a resource URL, and then at the bottom this will generate a redirect URL that Entra will need to know about. So for this next part, we're going to go over to entra.microsoft.com. This is just the home page, and then we're going to go into applications, app registrations. So we need to register an Entra ID application here so that it can be used to authenticate the custom connector with. So let's start a new registration. We'll call it Viva Engage as well. This directory only is fine. We don't need any other tenants accessing it. And we'll come back to the redirect URI later. But if I just register that for now, we've already got some of the details we need to copy over. So the first is that client ID. So if I copy that to the clipboard, I can go back to my custom connector configuration and paste it in. The next thing we need is a client secret. So if I go back to Entra, I can go to certificates and secrets, and I can generate a new one. So I'll just call it secret 1. I'll keep the default expiry date for now. And if I click add, that will create a secret for me to use. So the bit that we need to copy is this string here. And once we move away from this page, we won't be able to retrieve this again. So it's important that we make a note of it. But for now, let's go and paste it into the client secret box here. And that's that next part done. The next part we need to fill in is this resource URL. So that is the same as we were trying with the Entra ID connector, this whole base URL. So if I copy that, in fact, without the slash at the end there, that's the base URL for the API actions I want to use. So if I paste that in there, the rest of the options we can leave. So this redirect URL will need to give back to Entra. So if I just click create this connector for now, so there the custom connector's been created, and you can see that the redirect URL box has now been filled in. So if I copy this, I can take it back to Viva Engage, and I believe under authentication we can add a platform. We'll tell it this is a web application, and we're going to paste that redirect URI into this box. And if we click configure, that will allow the token to be provided to our custom connector. So the last thing we need to do while we're here in Entra ID is tell the app registration what permissions we want this application to have. So when someone gets the Entra ID token, this will be determining what that person can do with it. So I'm going to add a permission here, and you can see at the bottom there's Yammer. So if I click that, delegated permissions is fine because we'll be doing it as a user. So we'll just select this box for now, access as user, and we'll click add permissions. And once we've done that, if we also grant admin consent for this app registration to use those permissions, that's now everything done on the Entra ID side that we need. So we can carry on configuring the custom connector over here in the Power Automate portal. So in the portal, let's move on to defining the actions in the custom connector. So we'll create a new action, and then these first two boxes are what appear to the user. So we're going to use the get current user endpoint as the first one for the demonstration. So let's just call that get current user, and we'll give it a description. We can copy that from the documentation. So this endpoint returns information for the current user, including user ID, name, and email. So if we just copy that, we can paste it in here, give it a capital R. So those will appear to the end user, and then behind the scenes, the operation ID needs to be a unique name for this action. It can't have spaces in, so I'm just going to use that same title but get rid of those spaces. So that's what the user sees, and then in terms of what it does, we want to tell the custom connector what endpoint to request when it is used. So if I click import from sample, we can see on the documentation that this is a get request, and that this is the bit after our base URL that we need to use. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to tell it that it's a get request. I will paste in the URL, and then I will click import. So you can see that that's filled in from the base URL and the this additional bit of path that we filled in on the first page there on the general tab, the remainder of that request URL, and it's got at the end users/current.json. So if I click update connector, this connector should now exist and have that action available to it, which is useful before we go any further, because we can determine that we're actually able to authenticate to the Yammer API using our Entra ID token. So now we've added that action. If I go into the test tab, skipping these other ones out because we're not going to need them, you can see I need to create a connection to this custom connector in order to use it. So when I click that, it's asking me to authenticate. That will grant the Entra ID token to this custom connector so that we can then use it. We can see down here there's only one operation available to us at the moment, and that's the get current user action. So if I click test operation, you can see we've got a 200 status. That means it's worked, and you can see the details of the current signed in user. So that's whoever authenticated, as I just did above, to the connector. their details. So that gives us the Yammer network ID and the user ID, which we'll need going forward. So looking back at the documentation, the next action using the API we're going to use is this get groups for user by user ID endpoint. So you can see the format here. We're going to take that current user ID that we've just obtained in the test, and we're going to get the groups that, which means Viva Engage communities in this context, that are available for that user to use. So back on the definition page in our connector, we'll create a new action, and we'll call this one get user groups. And again, for the description, we'll copy something from the documentation. Returns the list of groups where the specified user is a member. So I copy that, and we'll use the same title here without the spaces again. And again, we'll go to import the request from a sample. So we need the, after the v1/ the remainder of this URL. I'll paste that in there. You can see on the documentation that this is also a GET request. So let's click that. And now before we move on, what we need to do is tell the connector that this user ID is not going to be static. We're actually going to want to customize this, or the user is going to have to provide this when they run this action. And the way we do that is if we take out this section, well, we'll take out the colon because that's just the style that the documentation is using to denote that that's a variable. But we'll put some curly brackets around the user ID part here to indicate that that bit's going to be dynamic. When we click import, we can see that this user ID parameter here has been added to this path section. So not only have we got the full URL, but we've now got this, which will be a parameter for the user to provide when they run this action. So I'm just clicking the update connector option here. That will save the changes we've made to the custom connector. And then, so we'll test that first action again, get current user, and that's provided us with an ID for the current user. So if I copy that, I can then use that in my get user groups action to test whether that works. And you can see this time it's asking for that user ID. So I'm going to paste that in and then test that operation. Once again, we've got a 200, which means it's worked. And we can see here that there's the all company group, and below that the quizzes group. So this quizzes Viva Engage community is the one I want to use to actually post the praise post to. So that's worked too, which is nice. So the next endpoint we're going to add is the get user by email. So this will allow us to obtain the user ID of the target user, so the user we want to praise in our praise posts. So I'll take the end part of the endpoint there, and we'll create a new action here. So this will be get target user. We can copy the description again from here. Returns information for the current user, and that's based on the email address passed to the endpoint. So I'll copy that whole thing to the end. Paste that in as our description. That one is the spaces in there like before. Right, and then we'll import from the sample. So again, I think this was a GET request, and I'll just copy this again. This is the end part of the URL. So I'll paste that in there. We'll use GET, and then if I click import, this time that part after the end of the .json part of the URL has been converted because it was in a standard URL query format. So this is another parameter that we can provide to the flow, to the custom connector when we use this action, and it's gone in this query section instead this time. So again, if I save and test this, this time I'll use get target user. It's asking me for that email. So I'll use this test user email address I've got here. And that's again status 200. That means it's worked, and we've got the ID for that target user. So for the last action for this connector, this is the post message endpoint. So I'll just copy messages.json there, and back in our definition section, we'll add a new action. So this will be post message I'll do the request first while I'm here, and I've copied it in. So messages.json, that's a post type request. And for the body, I'm just going to leave this as an open and closed curly brace at the moment, and click import. So that will just allow us to provide the body in the Power Automate flow when it comes to run it. So the last thing I need is that description. So let's just copy this part of the description. And that can be the description for the action. So I'll save that connector there, and then I'll build a second connector to use for our files.ng base URL endpoint. So back here on the custom connectors page, I'll create a new one from blank again, and I'll call it this time Viva Engage upload file connector. That's too long. I'll just call it Viva Engage upload file then. So this time the host will be filesng.yammer.com. And there's only one endpoint, so it doesn't really matter too much, but I will take this /v4/ and put that as the base URL. Once again, here in authentication, I'm going to choose Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to fill in these with the same client ID and secret as before. And then actually the resource URL can't be filesng, otherwise we'd end up with the same error we had before. So in terms of that not being available in the tenant. So despite the fact that we're not actually going to connect to www.yammer.com as our endpoint, we can put that in the resource URL and it will still work. So once again, I'll click create connector. And once that redirect URL has been generated, I'll copy that, and back in our app registration, I'll add that as another redirect URI and save. So that will allow this app registration to work with both our custom connectors now. So on the definition page, we'll create another new action, and we'll call this upload small file. We'll use that as the operation ID, again without those spaces. And for the description, we'll copy that from the documentation again. Enables file upload to a Yammer group. It's fine. And then request import from sample. So this time, despite the saying put at the top here, it says post. So this is a post type request. So we'll add post. We'll add the part of the URL. And again, for the body, I'll just put the curly braces for now, and we'll provide the body when designing our Power Automate flow. So that's now that full URL for the action we want to use. So if I update, that will save this connector, and that's all the preparation we need to do outside of actually building our flow. So the context in which we're going to do this Power Automate flow to post to praise is building on the previous flow we've built on this channel, where when a new response is submitted to a Microsoft Forms quiz, it runs a child flow which automatically scores the results of that quiz for the candidate. And then based on that score, we're going to decide if the candidate passed or not. So if they scored over 60 points or 60% of the points, then they will go down this true branch, in which case we're going to get the response details. That will get us the details of the responder. We're going to then use the get user profile action to use that user principal name of the responder to get the full profile for the user, which we're going to pass on to the remaining child flows. So the first one is a flow we've built before, which is using a custom word template to fill in some details. So in this case, the details are going to be the name, which comes from the profile, the display name of the responder, and the score they achieved out of 100 in the quiz. So that child flow looks like this. We're using the populate custom word template process we've come up with before, and this is where those variables are going in. So we're going to provide to the custom template the name from the trigger, the score, so the string of that numeric score coming into the trigger, and then we're also going to take the current date using the UTC now expression and format that as a long date. So they're the variables that are going to go into our certificate template. So this is that certificate template. It's got a placeholder for the name, score, and the date, and then an image which will change depending on whether the responder scored particularly high marks. So that'll go bronze, silver, or gold depending on the score. It's all in the previous video on this channel. And the only other difference is after that has created the Word document like we've done previously, it's then introduced a 10-second delay, which I found I needed before I can convert that file any further. So we're going to use the OneDrive action convert file using path to take that new Word document and convert it into a JPEG format, which is an image. And then using that JPEG content, we're going to create a file. So it's going to go in a folder in the OneDrive called certificates. It's going to be called certificate.jpg, using the content from that convert file using path action, and then we'll respond to the parent flow to say that we're ready to move on and post that image along with a nice message as a praise post to Yammer. So here we are in the child flow in the designer. So we've got a manually trigger a flow trigger, and we've asked for an email as the parameter here, which is for the target user. So that will let us look up the user's ID and use that to send the praise post to them using the Yammer API. So the first thing we need to do is get that image. So if I do a get file content even from OneDrive, because that certificate's being saved to my OneDrive, and it's going to go in a defined location, which is this root certificates certificate.jpg path. So that will grab the content of that image, so I'll be able to use that further down the line in this flow in order to post it to Yammer. So the next thing we need to do is start using our custom connector. So if I go to add an action and under runtime, I'll click custom. You can see here are our two custom connectors that we've just created in the custom connector creation portal. So the first one we want to use is our Viva Engage connector. And these are those actions we defined. And you can see here is the description we provided about what the action does. And there's the title that we filled in the summary box for the user to see, to identify the action. So the first one we're going to use is get current user. And we'll have to sign in to create a connection against this custom connector. And for this first action, that's it, because if you remember, there were no parameters we needed to provide at all. We just needed to get the ID of that current user. So I'm going to publish this flow as is and run a quick test. So I'm going to do a manual test just of this child flow. It's asking me to sign in with my connections, but this is that target user that will be provided by the parent flow when we finally run it. But for now, I'll just paste in a target user and run the flow. So we can see that we've got that file content from the OneDrive certificate. So this under the $ content is the base 64 encoding of that image file. And then in the get current user action of our custom connector, we can see if I scroll down, so this is the outputs here. If I scroll down to the body, we can see what's come back from that connector. So we've got the type, which is user, and we've got the ID, which is the ID we need for the current user. which we'll then use to find out what groups are available to that current user in the next action. So here back in the designer, I'll add another action from our custom connector, and this time it's going to be get user groups. So we'll use the existing connection, and we want a user ID to go in here. So we're going to use an expression to generate this. We're going to get it from the body of get current user. So within that body, as we just saw in the results, there was under body an ID property, all lowercase, so we're just going to grab that. So if I do an open bracket, single quote, and then ID, and it's already closed those off for me. So if I add that, when I publish and retest this flow, what it should do this time is provide the ID from the get current user action to the get user groups action. I'll use the previous trigger, and that should get me in the outputs here a list of groups. So there's all company, and there's the quizzes group, which is this Viva Engage community to which I want to post the praise. The last action here I'm going to add from our custom connector is the get target user. So that's going to again use that existing connection, and this time what it wants is the email, which is going to go on that query string. So this is coming from the trigger. So if I just do dynamic content under manually trigger a flow, which is my trigger, I've got the target user email address. So if I just put that in there, and again I'll publish and test this, what this should do is get the ID amongst other things for the target user, and that's all the preparatory steps we need to take, all the additional information before we start running our flows, our additional actions to post the message and upload that file. So we can see here now in the get target user output, here's all the details, but most importantly, we've got the ID, which we can use further on in the flow. So the next thing we need to do is work with the output of this get user groups, which at the moment you can see the body here, in the output is an array. It's an array of groups. So the first one here is called all company, and we need just one group ID to use as the target for our praise post. So we're going to have to filter down this body array to find the group with the full name here that matches what we want to see, which in this case is quizzes, and then from that we can take the ID. So to do that, if we go back to edit our flow, after getting all the information from Viva Engage, we can add a new step. So here we're going to use a filter array, and the input to this filter array is going to be the body of get user groups, which we just saw was that array. And here we want to add a filter query. So in this case, every group in the list is going to be the current item. So what we want to do is take that full name, which is full underscore name, and we want to check that that's equal to, in this case it was quizzes. So that then should return an array of a single group, which we can use to get the ID that we want. So if I just publish this and test it, we will now see in the output a body with a single group in it. So if we get the first item in the body here and get the ID from that, we've got the ID, the group that we need. So the next step is to use our other connector to upload that file, the certificate image. So if I go back to our custom list of connectors, and I'm going to use this Viva Engage upload file connector this time, and I'm going to select the upload small file action. This is a different connector, so I'm going to have to create a new connection here. So we'll just authorize that. And then all we need to provide here is the body of this request. So this is a relatively complex body, and as a result of various Googling and trial and error, I've come up with the following template. So You can see it's in a multi-part form data format. And the way that works is you have an array of properties, and each one has its header, which tells the receiving API what we're sending it, and then the body, which is the actual content that we want to send to the API. So for this first part of the multi-part form, we're going to send it the network ID. We're going to put that over this placeholder I've got here for the network ID. So we can see in the output of the get current user action in the flow results, there was a property called network ID. So we'll use that to fill in this template here. So I'll just overwrite network ID there, and I'm going to insert an expression, which will be the dynamic content from the get current user body. And then from that, we'll get that network underscore ID. So the next property is the target type. So we're posting to a group, so we'll just leave that as is. I've also already filled in the file name here to be certificate.jpg. And then we need this file content section. So again, we could see from the previous run of the flow that the output of the get file content action had two properties. And we want this $content, which is the base 64 encoded string, which represents our image. So if we go back into our flow and overwrite this content section with another expression, we can use the dynamic output of the get file content. And again, we'll put in there the property we want, which in this case was $content. Okay, and the last part here is the group ID. So we've just seen that that can be obtained from our filter array. So if we go again and write an expression here, we're going to use the dynamic content, which is the output of the filter array. But we know that that's an array of 1 because we filtered it down to a single group. So we're going to get the first of that array. And then from that first, we're going to get the ID property, which was the ID of the target group. So that's that. And now if I save this, I can test it and we'll see what happens. So we can see here that that upload small file is apparently successful. So what we should be able to see now, if we go to the quizzes group or a community on Viva Engage, it's a file which has gone into the file section. Remember, this is SharePoint under the hood. We've got that certificate.jpg that's now appeared in the document library associated with this Viva Engage community. So that upload small file step has worked. So one important thing to note before we move on is in the output of the upload small file action, we've got an ID, and that's the ID for this particular file, the Yammer ID that we'll need to pass to the post message endpoint in order to post our praise, including that image. So let's go back to edit our flow. This time we're going to add the final action, which is again from our original custom connector, Viva Engage connector here, the post message action. So this is the last action we're going to require. And again, it's asking for the body. And by some searching and experimentation, I've come up with the attached template. Once again, we need the group ID. We actually need it twice here. So I'm going to go back to our upload small file, and I'm going to take that group ID, which was the bottom one here, the first output of the array. Just need the action there. We'll post into group ID there and there. That's the ID of the group. And then we need the sender ID. So the sender ID was the ID that came back from our get current user action. So let's add an expression in to include that. So we've got get current user, and then it was the ID property from that. So then we need the target user ID. Now this is actually an array it wants here of praised user IDs. So I'm going to be careful I don't get rid of the outer square brackets there in this template. and we're going to put the target user ID in here. So the target user ID came from the get target user action, and again the property was ID. And then lastly, we need the file ID. So that was the file ID from the upload small file action. So we'll do the body of our upload small file, and we'll include that ID property that we just saw. So that's the full template there. The body is actually ignored for a praise type post, because the praise property here is what gets filled in as the comment. So I've just said, congratulations on passing the quiz. We've chosen the icon, which here is thumbs up, and we've included the praise user ID. So that should now show as a praise type post. So let's save and test it. And look, it's not happy with my JSON, so let's see what's wrong. So I think the issue might be here in get target user. The output was actually an array, again of length 1. So let's go back and edit the praise user ID. So we get the first of that body and get the ID property from there. I'm still not happy with my JSON. I think the actual problem is after I've put congratulations on passing the quiz, I've got rid of the escape for this. No, I've included one too many quotes there, so that should just be one quote escaped. There you go, that looks a bit better. And then the error message is gone. So that's good. So let's publish that now, and we can test it properly. So here we are, it's running the flow again. It's uploaded another small file, and it's then posted that message. So now if we go back to Viva Engage, we've got a post just now. So I've praised James Williams. I probably should have praised the other user to prove the point, but not to worry. So we've got congratulations on passing the quiz, and there's the image of that certificate with the filled in details, name and the date. So now let's test the whole parent flow and see if it works. So before we do that, here in the flow settings, let's just double check that run only permission is set to use a particular collection, and that's because child flows can't use the run only user permission because the user context is lost. That's been saved. So let's go and test the main flow. So here we are in the parent flow. I'm going to click test and manually, so that will now wait for a response to the form to come in. So let's go, here's one I filled in earlier with the correct answers, and I'll click next and submit. So that result should then get fed back to the flow. So it's triggered the flow, it's run the quiz scorer, and we can see that the score there was 4 out of 4. So it's passed the quiz, it's gone down this left-hand branch, and now it's running that child flow to generate a certificate, which, if we remember, includes a 10-second delay so that it can then generate the image file after it's created the Word document. So we should soon see that one finish, and then after that, hopefully, we'll run the child flow to post the praise, and then we'll have a. So that took 37 seconds, so that was quite long. But now it's running the child flow to post the praise, which is a bit quicker, 3 seconds there. So if I go back to Viva Engage, I've got one new message come through, so let's click that. Praise James Williams, congratulations on passing the quiz. And we've got today's date on there, the full 100% score and the name. So brilliant, we've managed to successfully post a praise to Viva Engage using Power Automate. So one thing you might notice is that if you then edit this praise, we can actually start doing things with formatting in the praise post here. So now you can see that it's got some bold text. What I can't seem to do is get it to do that via Power Automate using the API, and I think that's potentially because the API predated the existence of text formatting within Viva Engage. So it's possible the API was never updated to do that. And it's a different API that goes on behind the scenes, I think, when using the browser. But if you know how to automate the posting of a formatted post, please do let me know. So all that leaves is for me to say thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking and consider subscribing to my channel. In which case, I hope to see you soon. See you later, Automator.